I remember the first day I walked into the office of the Kincaid Fertilizer Company. I was only 24, brimming with ambition and a desire to prove myself. My father had just passed away, and everything was changing. I had been working in the company for years, alongside my stepmother Beth and stepsister Lucy, but back then, it was still just the start of what would become an incredibly difficult journey. Kincaid Fertilizer was one of the largest companies in the country, valued at an astounding $50 billion. Based in Houston, Texas, it was a sprawling enterprise, one that held the hopes and dreams of so many employees. But for me, it was a battleground. My stepmother Beth, now the CEO, ran the company with an iron fist. She had taken over after my father's sudden death, and her reign was unyielding. Beth was 64, and despite her age, she ruled with the same ruthless precision that had made the company successful. Beth's management style was unwavering and harsh. She had a way of making you feel like a cog in a vast machine, dispensable and easily replaced. Her sister, her cousin, and their spouses all held important positions in the company, and they were as loyal to her as they were to each other. Despite being a giant corporation, the company was struggling. Rising production costs and declining profits were eating away at its stability. I watched as financial strains began to tighten their grip on our operations. Then there was Lucy, my 33-year-old stepsister. Lucy had joined the company 3 years ago, but her time here was marked by disinterest and complaints. She often grumbled about the workload and the pay, expressing her frustration in the most dramatic ways. Unlike me, who had been there for over a decade, Lucy had barely scratched the surface of what it meant to work for Kincaid Fertilizer. But that didn't matter to Beth. Lucy was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in her eyes. Beth had always favored Lucy, showering her with praise and privileges that I had never received. I was given hand-me-downs, and every accomplishment I achieved seemed to be overshadowed by Lucy's mere presence. Despite my hard work and dedication, Beth's favoritism toward Lucy was a constant source of pain. I worked tirelessly, often staying late and sacrificing my personal time, but it seemed to make no difference. Beth's admiration was reserved for Lucy, who could barely be bothered to put in a full day's work. The turning point came one morning when Beth summoned me to her office. My heart pounded as I walked down the hallway, each step echoing my anxiety. I had hoped it was a routine meeting, perhaps about the upcoming financial reports. But as soon as I entered her office, the atmosphere shifted. Beth's gaze was cold, her expression unreadable. "Mia," she began, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth, "I'm letting you go." I was stunned. My mind raced, struggling to process her words. "What do you mean? Why?" Beth leaned back in her chair, her eyes showing no sign of remorse. "We need to make changes. Lucy is going to take over the company. It's time for you to move on." The shock was overwhelming. I tried to argue, to remind her of my years of service and dedication, but Beth remained unmoved. Her decision was final, and her dismissal was cold and impersonal. It felt like a slap in the face, a betrayal that cut deeper than I could have imagined. As I packed up my things from my office, I reflected on the years of my life that had been devoted to the company. The realization of Beth's deep-seated resentment started to dawn on me. It wasn't just about business, it was personal. My father's departure for another woman shortly after Lucy was born had left Beth feeling betrayed. She had projected that anger onto me, the innocent bystander, using me as a target for her unresolved pain. My aunt, who worked in the company and was well-respected, expressed sympathy for my situation. She knew how unfair the dynamics were, but she was powerless to challenge Beth's authority. During a conversation, she revealed that Lucy was insecure and often turned to me for help because she was incapable of handling her responsibilities. Despite Lucy's frequent errors and missed deadlines, Beth believed her beauty and charm would attract clients, just as it had worked for her in the past. As I completed my final tasks and said my goodbyes, the mockery from Beth and Lucy was palpable. They took pleasure in my departure, as if my leaving was a personal victory for them. I knew I had to leave behind not just the company, but a life that had been marked by emotional neglect and favoritism. I moved out of the family home, determined to start afresh. The pain of the past was still fresh, but I was ready to embrace a new beginning. Little did I know, this was just the start of a journey that would test my resolve and shape my future in ways I could never have anticipated. Leaving the Kincaid Fertilizer Company felt like stepping out of a shadowy prison and into the light. I was relieved, but the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on me. I had devoted over a decade to a place where I was never truly valued. Now, as I packed my belongings and moved into a small apartment, I felt a mixture of sadness and cautious hope. Finding a new job was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. I knew I needed to prove myself all over again, but this time, I would be valued for my skills rather than my familial connections. I was fortunate to land a position at a prominent accounting firm in Houston. The firm was well-regarded and offered the opportunity one needed to rebuild my career. The work was demanding, but it was a far cry from the toxic environment of Kincaid Fertilizer. My new role was challenging, but it was a fresh start. I was given responsibilities that required diligence and skill, and for the first time in years, I felt appreciated. The firm's team was professional and supportive, an environment that fostered growth rather than stifling it. I threw myself into my work, eager to demonstrate my capabilities and prove that I was more than just the sum of my family's reputation. In addition to starting my new job, I enrolled in a correspondence course for tax accountants. It was a rigorous program, but I was determined to excel. The classes were a way to further my qualifications and open up new opportunities in my career. Balancing work and study was tough, but it gave me a sense of purpose and direction that had been missing for so long. The change was both liberating and daunting. The small apartment I moved into was a far cry from the grand family home I had lived in. It was modest, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. I decorated it with care, choosing each piece thoughtfully to create a space that was comforting and reflective of my new life. One evening, as I was settling into my new routine, I received a call from my old aunt at Kincaid Fertilizer. She had some news that was difficult to hear. The company was in serious trouble. Lucy, despite her privileged position, had proven incapable of managing the business. The financial strain had worsened under her watch, and Beth's firm grip on the company had not been enough to stabilize it. My aunt expressed her sympathy, acknowledging the difficult position I had been forced into and the unfairness of the situation. The news came as no surprise. Lucy had never shown any genuine interest or aptitude for the work. She was more focused on her appearance and charm rather than the responsibilities of her role. It had always been apparent that she lacked the skills and dedication required to manage such a massive operation effectively. Beth's decision to favor Lucy over me had been a ticking time bomb, and it was finally coming to a head. While this information was unsettling, it also reinforced my resolve. I was grateful to be away from the chaos and dysfunction of the company. My new job and studies were providing me with a sense of accomplishment and self-worth that had been missing for years. For the first time, I felt I was on a path that I had chosen for myself, not dictated by others' whims and biases. Months passed, and I continued to thrive in my new environment. My performance at the accounting firm was recognized, and I was gaining confidence in my abilities. The coursework was demanding, but I was excelling and earning respect from my peers. The sense of fulfillment I experienced was unlike anything I had known at Kincaid Fertilizer. Despite the progress I was making, I still had moments of reflection. I thought about my old life, the sacrifices I had made, and the emotional toll of being constantly overshadowed by Lucy. But I also thought about the future and the opportunities that lay ahead. I was no longer the person who had been stifled by favoritism and neglect. I was reclaiming my independence, one step at a time. Then one day, while I was at work, I ran into someone from Kincaid Fertilizer. It was an old colleague who had left the company before me. He filled me in on the latest developments. The company was in shambles, struggling to keep its head above water. Beth had tried to reach out to me, hoping I would come back and help save the business. But the idea of returning was unthinkable. The environment was toxic, and the wounds from the past were still too fresh. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a hint of vindication. The company's downfall was a stark reminder of the dysfunction I had left behind. But it also confirmed that I had made the right choice. My new life was not without its challenges, but it was mine to navigate, and I was determined to succeed on my own terms. I continued to build my career, making strides in both my job and my studies. The sense of purpose and fulfillment I felt was a stark contrast to the years of emotional neglect and favoritism. Each day, I was reminded of the strength and resilience that had carried me through the darkest times. As I settled into my new routine, I began to appreciate the freedom and autonomy that came with it. My life was no longer dictated by the whims of my stepmother or the favoritism toward my stepsister. It was my turn to shine, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. A year had passed since I left Kincaid Fertilizer and started my new life. Things were going well for me. My work at the accounting firm was thriving, and I was excelling in my tax accountant course. I had managed to carve out a space for myself where my skills were appreciated and my hard work was acknowledged. My new apartment, though modest, was my sanctuary, a place where I felt safe and in control. One day, as I was walking to work, I unexpectedly crossed paths with my old aunt from Kincaid Fertilizer. It had been months since I last heard from her, and seeing her now was both surprising and unsettling. She looked worried, and her demeanor was serious. We decided to grab a coffee and catch up. As we sat down at a quiet cafe, my aunt shared the troubling news. The company was in a dire state. Lucy's incompetence had driven the once thriving business to the brink of collapse. Beth's insistence on placing Lucy in charge had backfired spectacularly. The financial strain was too much, and the company was losing clients rapidly. My aunt's voice was filled with concern as she spoke about the chaos unfolding at Kincaid Fertilizer. Beth had reached out to her, trying to manipulate her into persuading me to return. She was desperate. The company's decline was a direct result of her poor decisions and her favoritism toward Lucy. The once giant corporation was now a shadow of its former self, struggling to stay afloat amidst mounting debts and dwindling resources. Hearing about the company's downfall was a complex mix of emotions for me. On one hand, it was vindicating to see that my departure had been a wise decision. On the other, there was a twinge of sadness. Despite everything, Kincaid Fertilizer had been a significant part of my life for over a decade. The downfall of something so central to my past was a stark reminder of the toxicity I had left behind. My aunt continued, "Beth has been trying to convince everyone that you are the only one who could save the company. She even went so far as to blame you for her and Lucy's failures. It's quite a mess." The notion of Beth blaming me for her own failings was infuriating, but not surprising. She had always been quick to shift blame rather than face her mistakes. Lucy, on the other hand, had continued to make a mess of things, her lack of competence becoming more evident with each passing day. My aunt also mentioned that Beth had publicly accused me of leaving because of my appearance, a tactic to deflect attention from her own role in the company's decline. It was a cruel and baseless accusation, but it fit the pattern of Beth's behavior. She had always been quick to criticize others to protect her own image. I could only imagine how she was spinning the narrative to absolve herself of responsibility. Over the following weeks, I noticed more news reports and social media posts about the downfall of Kincaid Fertilizer. The company's financial woes were now public knowledge. The once proud enterprise was reduced to a cautionary tale of mismanagement and favoritism. The media coverage was relentless, with Beth and Lucy being publicly scrutinized. It was both shocking and, in some ways, satisfying to see the repercussions of their actions. The culmination of the scandal came when Beth's public outburst was captured on video and went viral. During a heated confrontation at a company event, Beth accused me of being the real cause of the company's problems, blaming my supposed lack of appearance rather than her own failures. The footage spread quickly, and the backlash was swift. The company lost its remaining clients, and the once thriving business was left in ruins. Beth and Lucy's downfall was swift. The company's financial ruin forced them to move to a small, dilapidated apartment. The once mighty Kincaid Fertilizer was now a shadow of its former self. Seeing the company's collapse from a distance was both a confirmation of my choice to leave and a reminder of the deep-seated issues I had endured. I reflected on the dramatic turn of events with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief because it validated my decision to step away from the toxic environment, and sorrow because it marked the end of an era that had once been a significant part of my life. The collapse of Kincaid Fertilizer was a sobering reminder of how deeply flawed the family dynamics had been. As the media frenzy died down and the company's name faded from the headlines, I continued to focus on my own journey. My career at the accounting firm was progressing well, and I had found a sense of stability and fulfillment that had been missing for so long. I was thriving in my new role, and my studies were going well. Life was beginning to feel like a new chapter, one that I was writing for myself, free from the shadows of the past. The confrontation with my aunt and the subsequent news of Kincaid Fertilizer's downfall marked a turning point. It was the end of an era and the beginning of my own story, a story of independence, self-worth, and resilience. As I looked toward the future, I knew that I had made the right decision and that the path I was on was leading me toward a more fulfilling and authentic life. After the media storm had settled and the remnants of Kincaid Fertilizer had vanished from the news cycle, I found myself at a pivotal moment in my life. The chaos of my past was finally behind me, and I was ready to focus entirely on my future. My career was flourishing, and my personal life was beginning to take shape in ways I had never imagined. In the midst of this new chapter, I met Alex, a kind and supportive partner who understood the weight of my past and celebrated my achievements. Our relationship was a grounding force in my life, providing the emotional support I had longed for. Alex's encouragement and love were a stark contrast to the dismissive and toxic interactions I had grown accustomed to with my stepmother and stepsister. As the months went by, I continued to excel in my job and my coursework. My proficiency in tax accounting was quickly recognized, and I was promoted to a managerial position within the firm. It was the first time in my career that my contributions were acknowledged and rewarded in such a meaningful way. I felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that my hard work was finally paying off. Then, one crisp autumn morning, I was in the middle of a meeting when I received a call from my old aunt. She was still at Kincaid Fertilizer and had been keeping an eye on how things were unfolding. Her voice was tinged with a mix of relief and worry. She informed me that Beth and Lucy were now living in a small, dilapidated apartment, struggling to make ends meet. The company's collapse had left them in financial ruin, and their lives had drastically changed from the opulence they once enjoyed. Hearing this news brought a complex swirl of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated, knowing that the consequences of their actions had finally caught up with them. Yet another part of me felt a deep sense of sadness for the lives that had been affected. The downfall of Kincaid Fertilizer was not just a corporate failure, it was a profound personal loss for those involved. Despite the turmoil surrounding my past, I continued to move forward. My relationship with Alex grew stronger, and together we built a life filled with joy and stability. We traveled, explored new interests, and supported each other in our personal and professional endeavors. It was a life that felt genuine and fulfilling, a stark contrast to the false pretense and emotional neglect I had endured for so long. One day, while walking through a local park, I received an unexpected message from my aunt. She had been given an opportunity to help a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families affected by corporate collapses and financial hardships. The organization aimed to provide counseling, financial assistance, and career support to those who had been left in difficult situations. My aunt wanted to know if I would be interested in contributing my skills to the cause. The idea of using my experience to help others who had faced similar hardships was both appealing and cathartic. I agreed to join the organization and quickly became involved in their efforts. Working with the nonprofit allowed me to channel my experiences into something positive, helping others navigate their own challenges and find a path to recovery. As I worked with the nonprofit, I encountered individuals whose stories mirrored my own in various ways. They faced familial favoritism, emotional neglect, and the difficult journey to reclaim their lives. Sharing my experiences with them and offering guidance was both empowering and healing. It gave me a sense of purpose and connected me to a broader community of individuals who understood the complexities of overcoming toxic family dynamics. Years passed, and I continued to thrive in my career and personal life. My work with the nonprofit organization remained a significant part of my journey, and I found fulfillment in helping others rebuild their lives. Alex and I eventually decided to start a family of our own, and our lives were filled with the joy and love we had always dreamed of. Reflecting on my past, I realized how far I had come. The emotional scars from my time at Kincaid Fertilizer had healed, and I had grown into a person who valued self-respect and resilience. The journey had been arduous, but it had led me to a place of genuine happiness and fulfillment. I was finally living life on my own terms, free from the shadows of my past. My story was one of triumph over adversity, of reclaiming my independence and self-worth despite the challenges I had faced. As I looked toward the future, I felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude for the life I had built and the lessons I had learned along the way.